My wife ditched me for a coworker on her birthday. She never thought I'd file for divorce, but I did. What happened next shocked everyone. Hey Reddit, I'm not one to typically share personal stories, but I felt compelled to tell mine. It's been a roller coaster of events, and I could really use some external perspective, or maybe just some validation. I was married to my wife for 12 years, but we were together for 14. Was it perfect? No, but whose marriage is? We had our fair share of ups and downs, but through it all, I always believed we'd face everything together. The idea of parting ways never crossed my mind. She wasn't just my wife. She was my best friend, my partner, the one person I thought I could count on no matter what. Then came September 2022, and my life was completely upended. I was on my way to a work site. I'm an HVAC technician, or at least I was. Out of nowhere, a garbage truck slammed into my car at full speed. The impact was so sudden that all I remember was the sound of shattering glass and my head slamming into the side of the door. It was like time stood still. When I finally came to, I was being pulled from the wreckage with people asking if I could move my arms and legs. Honestly, I was so disoriented that I didn't even know what was happening. I didn't break anything, thank God, but I didn't exactly walk away unscathed. The pain set in within days. Intense burning pain in my lower back, like someone had stabbed me and left the knife there. At first, I thought it was temporary, that it would go away. But it didn't. I tried to push through. My wife helped with little things around the house in the beginning, telling me it was just a phase. But after about 2 months of limping around, something began to change. It wasn't immediate, but I started noticing little things. Her sighing when I asked for help, the way she'd roll her eyes when I needed her to pick something up because I couldn't bend down. I told myself it was stress. After all, I wasn't working, so we were living off one income. It was tough, but still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. By December 2022, I tried to go back to work. My doctor didn't think it was a good idea, but I hated feeling useless. I convinced him to let me try. But after just 3 days of barely holding it together, I collapsed from the pain while loading tools into my van. My boss told me to go home, and my doctor took me off work indefinitely. That was when reality hit. I wasn't going back anytime soon, and I felt like I was failing my wife. I had always been the provider, the guy who worked hard, paid the bills, took care of things around the house. Now I felt like a burden, broken and unable to help. I did what I could to stay positive. I applied for financial assistance to cover the bills, and thankfully we qualified. It took some pressure off her, but I thought things would get better once I could contribute again. Unfortunately, they didn't. Then, in May 2023, things got worse. One night, I woke up in agony, sweating, my stomach feeling like it was being torn apart from the inside. I tried to hold out, but by 5 a.m., the pain was unbearable. I woke her up and told her we needed to go to the hospital. Her reaction? She groaned and gave me a look like I was asking her to do the most inconvenient thing in the world. "Are you sure it's that bad?" she asked, as if I wasn't literally doubled over in pain. I told her yes, and after a long pause, she started fixing her hair and makeup before we left. She refused to drive, so I had to drive myself to the ER, hunched over in pain with her sitting next to me. At the hospital, the doctors told me my appendix had ruptured and I needed emergency surgery. After the surgery, they found an infection and kept me overnight for observation. I called her and asked if she could stay with me or take a day off to help me recover. Her response? "I can't, I have work." I get it, work's important. But I was lying in a hospital bed with an infection, and she couldn't even spare one day to help me. That night, I lay there alone, hooked up to machines, wondering what had happened to us. When I got home the next day, there was no, "How are you feeling?" or "Can I get you anything?" Nothing. It was like I was just an inconvenience in her life. At that point, I began to question everything. Looking back, that was when I started to lose hope, though I didn't confront it. Instead, I buried those thoughts deep down, telling myself that she was just overwhelmed and didn't mean to act so distant. I tried to ignore the signs, convincing myself that things weren't as bad as they seemed. But deep down, I knew things were falling apart. What hurt the most was that I felt completely alone. She was right there in the same house, but I might as well have been living by myself. I wanted to talk to her about how I was feeling, how scared I was about my health, my job, our future. But every time I tried to open up, she shut me down. She'd sigh or brush me off with some "it'll be fine" in a tone that made it clear she didn't want to talk about it. By June 2023, I started to see how far apart we had drifted. It was no longer like living with a partner. It felt like having a roommate. I thought things might improve once I started feeling better physically, but I was wrong. By then, the tension in the house was palpable. Every day felt like I was walking on eggshells. It seemed like everything I did annoyed her. If I asked for help, it was a burden. If I tried to do things on my own, I was being dramatic. I didn't know how to make things right. Then one evening we were sitting on the couch. The TV was on, but neither of us was really watching. She casually made a comment that made my blood run cold. "I'm back paid in this marriage." I paused, unsure if I'd heard her correctly. Back paid. I repeated, my mind racing. What's that supposed to mean? She gave me a half-smile, half-annoyed look and said something like, "Well, I've been holding everything together for months now, paying bills, taking care of everything." I wasn't angry, just stunned. I tried to laugh it off, joking, "Don't let the door hit you on the way out." I meant it as a light-hearted remark, the way couples tease each other. But she didn't laugh. Her face dropped, and she snapped back. "You think that's funny? Do you have any idea how trapped I feel right now?" Trapped. I didn't know how to respond. I was the one dealing with the pain, the surgeries, the uncertainty. I wasn't asking for sympathy, just support. I told her, "Look, I know this sucks for both of us. I haven't been able to work, but I'm doing everything I can to fix it. I even applied for financial help, so you wouldn't have to do everything alone." She shrugged, indifferent. "Yeah, but I'm still the one paying for everything." That hit me hard. It felt like nothing I did was enough. I didn't bring it up again. I thought maybe she just needed to vent. But the situation only got stranger from there. A few days later, she told me she was spending the night at a coworker's place. I asked why, and she said she needed to talk to someone about her feelings. I didn't argue. If it helped her, I told her to go. I thought maybe this would be good for us. She'd come back refreshed, and we could try to work things out. But the next week, she mentioned her birthday was coming up. I assumed we'd spend it together. We'd been together for 14 years, after all. I casually asked, "Do you want me to make a reservation somewhere, or just do something at home?" She hesitated before replying, "I'm actually going out for dinner with a girl from work." I blinked. "You don't want to spend your birthday with me?" Her smile was cold, not warm at all. "I already made plans. It's just dinner." That stung. Her birthday had always been something special to me, and I'd always tried to make each year better than the last. The idea that she'd rather spend it with someone else was a gut punch. But I didn't argue. Maybe she needed space from all the stress. The next day, something felt off. I couldn't shake the feeling that she wasn't being honest with me. Maybe it was because I'd never heard her mention this coworker before. So I asked, "Who's this coworker you're having dinner with?" Her annoyance was clear. "Why does it matter? It's just a friend." I wasn't convinced. "Is it a guy?" I pressed. She froze just for a second, but I saw it. "I told you it's a girl." That night, I couldn't sleep. My mind raced, fueled by suspicion. Maybe it was gut instinct or paranoia, but I couldn't shake the feeling she was hiding something. The next morning, I decided to check her phone. I know it was wrong, but I had to know. And sure enough, there it was, a text conversation with someone saved as Mike from work. They were making plans for dinner that night, and it wasn't with any girl. It was with him. When she came home that night, I couldn't hold it in anymore. I confronted her. I told her I knew she hadn't gone out with a girl from work, that she'd been with a guy. She didn't even try to deny it. Instead, she just looked pissed that I'd found out. "Why are you checking my phone? Don't you trust me?" she snapped. "Trust you." I shot back, feeling the anger rise. "You literally lied to my face. If you didn't do anything wrong, why lie?" She exploded. "I'm tired of you always being around. You're smothering me." I just needed a night out. Is that so hard to understand? I couldn't believe what I was hearing. This was her birthday, and instead of spending it with me, her husband, she chose to lie and go out with another guy. I asked her point blank, "Is something going on between you two?" She rolled her eyes. "Oh my God, no. It's just dinner." We fought for hours that night. By the time it was over, I was so drained that I packed a bag and drove to my mom's house to clear my head. I didn't tell her where I was going because I couldn't handle the constant arguments. I thought some space might help. But when I came back later to grab a change of clothes, she was waiting for me. She started yelling, demanding to know where I had gone, accusing me of giving up on our marriage. I couldn't believe it. I left for a few hours to cool off, and suddenly I was the villain? I reminded her that she was the one lying, the one who didn't want to spend her birthday with me, but she turned it around, claiming I didn't care about her feelings. I was so defeated in that moment. I didn't know what to do anymore. For a split second, I thought about walking away for good. But then I remembered the 14 years we'd spent together. I told myself this was just a rough patch, and that we could work through it. I was wrong. After the fiasco with her birthday dinner, things weren't just tense. They were shattered. I don't even know how to describe the feeling of living under the same roof as someone you've been with for over a decade, yet feeling like strangers. She'd come home from work, and we barely said a word to each other. When we did speak, it was only about basic, transactional things like bills or groceries. It was so strange because we used to talk about everything. I'd tell her about my day, the little things that happened at work. She'd share stories about her coworkers or her plans for the week. But by July 2023, even our conversations felt forced. It felt like we were just waiting for the other to snap. One night, she came home later than usual. It wasn't terribly late, maybe 10 p.m., but I noticed. "Where were you?" I asked, trying not to sound accusatory, just curious. She sighed dramatically, like I had asked the dumbest question ever. "I told you I was out with friends." I pressed. "Which friends?" She shot me a look, irritated. "Why does it matter?" And that's when it hit me. She didn't care anymore. Not about me. Not about the marriage. Not about any of it. I wasn't accusing her of cheating or lying. I just wanted to know where she was because we were married. But it was like she was deliberately keeping her life separate from mine, as if I didn't deserve to know. I tried to tell myself I was just being insecure, that I was overthinking it. But it wasn't just that night, it was everything. The way she'd pull away emotionally. The way she avoided being home more and more. The way she barely even looked at me, like I was some stranger living in her house. I couldn't take it anymore. We needed to talk. The next morning I sat her down. My heart was racing. Part of me didn't even want to have the conversation, because I was terrified of what she'd say. But I couldn't keep pretending everything was fine. "We can't keep going like this," I said. "If something's bothering you, we need to talk about it. We've been through too much to just give up now." She stared at me for a moment before speaking. "I feel like I don't have space anymore. I'm overwhelmed." "Space," I repeated, baffled. "We're barely even talking as it is." "I need space," she said. "I need it all. I've been thinking about getting my own place." My world stopped. "An apartment? You think that's going to fix things? Moving out will save our marriage." She nodded, almost coldly. "Yes. I need time to clear my head." I didn't buy it. "If you move out, that's not fixing anything. That's running away. You know I can't pay for this house on my own right now." She shrugged, uninterested. "Not my problem. I can't live like this anymore," she said. We fought for hours. I begged her to reconsider. I promised I'd go to therapy, that we could try counseling, that we could work through this. But she shut it all down. Her calmness was unnerving, like she'd already made up her mind, and there was nothing left to say. "If you move out," I told her, my voice steady, but edged with finality, "I'll file for divorce." She barely reacted, rolling her eyes as if it didn't matter, though I were making an empty threat. "You won't," she muttered, dismissing me as if I were some fool for even suggesting it. In the weeks that followed, I could feel everything slipping away. Her search for apartments became a constant reminder of how far apart we were growing. Every time she came home, it felt like she was a stranger, like the woman I married had somehow vanished. I tried to act like everything was fine, but the hurt was undeniable. I found myself watching her silently, asking how we ended up here. Finally, I asked, the words tumbling out despite the lump in my throat. "Are you sure this is really what you want? You're really going to leave me?" Without hesitation, she answered, "Yes, I think it's for the best." I felt a numbness spread through me as I processed her words. 14 years together, and it seemed to mean nothing to her. I meant nothing to her. The days leading up to her move felt like a slow suffocation. Tension hung thick in the air, like a storm cloud neither of us was willing to address. We barely spoke unless it was necessary about movers, furniture, logistical details. Every word felt like a hollow echo of what we used to have. The thought of arguing over things as trivial as who gets the couch felt pointless. In my mind, it was already over. Then something in me shifted. I don't know what it was. Maybe it was the silence, the creeping sense of betrayal, but I couldn't ignore it any longer. I started thinking back to all the late nights, the distance between us, the moments where she seemed to shut me out entirely. And I thought of her coworker, Mike. Something in my gut told me there was more to the story, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I needed to know. One afternoon, when she was at work, I did something I regret. I found her Apple Watch on the kitchen counter. Her phone was synced to it. I told myself I was being paranoid, that I wouldn't find anything. But my hands moved on their own. What I discovered turned my stomach. The texts were a slap to my chest, between her and Mike. Messages that went back months. One in particular stood out. "I want you so bad. When can we hook up?" I stood there frozen, my heart sinking as I stared at that tiny screen. When she came home later, I confronted her. There was no hiding it anymore. At first, she laughed, actually laughed, like I was overreacting. "You went through my stuff?" she asked, her tone almost mocking. I wasn't backing down. I saw the messages. "You've been talking to him for months, planning to meet up with him. What else am I supposed to think?" Her laughter faded, replaced by a defensive look. "It's just a joke. You're blowing this way out of proportion." I shook my head in disbelief. "A joke? Do you think it's funny to talk like that with another guy?" That's when she snapped. "Well, maybe if you actually gave me attention, I wouldn't have to look somewhere else." The weight of her words hit me like a punch to the gut. In that moment, I realized she had already checked out, months before I had even begun to notice. She moved out that August, and in a strange way, I let her go. The truth was I was tired of fighting for something that had been dead for months, maybe longer. I'd given everything I had to make it work, but it was clear she was already gone. The last week, before she moved, was suffocating. The air in the house was thick with unspoken words. We were strangers in the same space, doing the bare minimum to coexist. I didn't fight over the furniture. I didn't care who got the dishes or the TV. The house no longer felt like a home, just a place to survive. Watching her pack up made it real. I expected tears, or at least some sort of sign that this was hard for her. But she was eerily calm, moving through the motions like she was already detached from everything we'd built. There was no reminiscing, no sadness, just cold, impersonal efficiency. It felt like she didn't even see me anymore. "Why are you doing this?" I asked once, the question slipping out before I could stop it. "Can't you explain it to me one more time?" She sighed, as if I were the unreasonable one. "I need space. I need to figure things out for myself." I pressed her. "What does that even mean? Are you planning on coming back?" She didn't answer. Instead, she grabbed another box and left without a word. The silence that followed felt like the final nail in the coffin. I don't know why I helped remove some of the heavier stuff that day. Maybe I thought seeing her walk away with everything would somehow give me closure. But when we got to her new apartment, it hit me that she wasn't just leaving, she was starting over. The place was modern, clean, with big windows and an emptiness that screamed fresh start. Before I left, I asked her, "Are you happy now?" Her response was a look I'll never forget, cold, emotionless, and final. It wasn't sadness, anger, or regret, just indifference. In that moment, I knew the truth. She wasn't coming back. I didn't know how to feel. I nodded quietly and left, stepping into a house that suddenly seemed colder, emptier. The first night without her was unbearable. I sat in the silence of our home, every corner a reminder of everything that had been shattered. Her belongings were gone, her side of the closet empty. The house that had once been our shared space now felt like a hollow shell, a memory of something that was no more. I couldn't sleep. The hours stretched on, and I found myself staring at the ceiling, trapped in my own thoughts. I replayed everything over and over. The accident, the surgery, the arguments, the texts. I kept asking myself the same questions. What did I do wrong? Was I not enough for her? Could I have stopped this? The more I thought, the more I felt like I was failing, like I had been nothing but a mistake in her eyes. The next morning, I forced myself to get up. I had physical therapy scheduled, and I needed to keep some semblance of routine, but nothing felt normal. The pain in my back still hadn't eased, and the weight of everything happening only made it worse. At therapy, my therapist saw through my attempts at a mask. She asked how I was doing. Not great, I replied, the words coming out raw. I told her everything, what had happened, what I was going through, how much it hurt. For the first time in months, someone actually said something I needed to hear. You can't carry all the blame for this, she said, her voice gentle but firm. You didn't ask to get hurt. You didn't ask for her to pull away. Her words didn't make the pain disappear, but they gave me a new perspective. I realized I had spent too much time blaming myself, feeling like I was broken. But maybe this wasn't all my fault. Maybe it wasn't me. 2 weeks after she left, I got a message from a friend. They asked how I was doing, but casually added, I saw your ex at the bar downtown last night. She was with some guy. They looked pretty cozy. I stared at my phone in disbelief. I didn't want to believe it, but deep down I knew. She hadn't needed space or time to think. She had someone else. All those late nights, the new interest in her social life, the texts with Mike, it all made sense now. She had checked out long before I even started processing everything. While I was still trying to put the pieces together, she had already moved on. The rest of the day passed in a fog. I didn't call her, didn't text. What was the point? She had made her decision. The next morning, I called a lawyer and started the process for divorce. When I told her a few days later, her response was as cold as I expected. She smirked. You're bluffing. Do I look like I'm bluffing? I shot back. She didn't answer. I don't know what she thought. Maybe she thought I'd beg her to stay. Maybe she thought I'd back down. But I didn't. I'd spent months feeling like I wasn't enough, like I was a burden to her. Seeing how little she cared was the final wake-up call. I deserved more. We didn't have kids, so the divorce moved quickly. We didn't have much to fight over either. She took her things, I kept mine. By mid-September, the paperwork was in motion. In the weeks before the final signing, she barely spoke to me. If she needed something, it was always a text, like I was some distant acquaintance instead of her husband. Can you forward me the utility bill? Did you cancel the internet? No more conversations. Just business. Then, out of the blue, she called me one day, asking for a favor. She had totaled her car in an accident. Ironic, given everything, and needed to borrow mine to get to work. I couldn't believe it. No, I told her, my voice firm. You're not my problem anymore. She hung up, and that was the last real conversation we had. By the time the divorce was finalized in December 2023, I didn't feel relief. I felt numb. 14 years together, and now she was a stranger. The person I thought I knew was gone, or maybe she never really existed. She had moved on, leaving me to pick up the pieces. I didn't hear from her again. No updates on her address. Her mail still came to my house, and at first, I tried to contact her about it, but she ignored me as usual. Eventually, I just started writing, return to sender, and putting it back in the mailbox. I know it sounds petty, but it was my way of letting go. By September, the divorce was almost done. I had no fight left in me. Anyone who's been through something like this will understand. It's not dramatic or full of fiery arguments. By then, it's just draining. It's like someone pulls the plug and all the energy, all the hope, leaks out. She wasn't angry. I wasn't angry. It was all mechanical. We signed paperwork, talked about utilities, discussed who would take what. It felt more like dissolving a business partnership than ending a relationship. The whole who gets what conversation barely lasted. She packed her things, clothes, personal items, the furniture she wanted for her new place. I didn't argue. I didn't want anything that reminded me of her. The couch where we used to curl up? Take it. The kitchen table where we shared meals? Don't care. It sounds dramatic, I know, but every object felt tainted. Keeping anything felt like dragging the ghost of our past relationship around with me. It was time to let go. When it came to the house, I made the decision to stay. I knew that many people sell everything after a divorce, hoping to start fresh. But I couldn't bring myself to do it. I've always been someone who resists change, and leaving the house we shared, on top of everything else, felt like too much to handle. Instead, I applied for financial hardship, figuring I'd just hold on as long as I could. A month after we filed, I overheard through mutual friends that she was already seeing someone. It was probably the same guy I had seen in her texts. I didn't feel the anger. I thought I would. No, it was something worse. Numbness. Of course. Of course she was moving on. That's who she was now. The version of her that had once cared, supported me, and treated our marriage as something meaningful. It was all gone. But the hardest part wasn't dealing with the divorce papers or hearing about her new life. It was the silence. After 14 years of having someone there, someone to talk to or simply share space with, it was a shock to wake up in an empty house. The quiet felt almost suffocating. I started to notice how little I was taking care of myself. Meals? I'd forget them or skip them entirely. Things I used to enjoy, like tinkering with my tools or watching a game, were now distant memories. I found myself sitting on the couch for hours, scrolling through my phone, endlessly absorbing meaningless distractions, unsure what else to do with myself. Then one day, my mom stopped by with some food. As she took in the state of the house, her eyes flickered with concern. "You can't keep living like this," she said gently. "You need to pick yourself up." I didn't snap at her, though I wanted to. She was right. But at that moment, I didn't have the energy to fight back. I wanted to ask, how do you pick up the pieces after everything? After the accident, the injuries, losing my marriage, and feeling like a shadow of who I used to be, I couldn't see where to start. Then October 2023 came, and with it, a phone call from her. When I saw her name on my screen, my stomach dropped. I didn't know what to do, answer it or ignore it. But curiosity got the better of me. "Hello," I answered, my voice more hesitant than I'd like. "Hey," she said flatly, with no small talk. "I need to borrow your car." I couldn't believe it. After everything that had happened, this is what she called me for. She explained she had been in a car accident, her car was totaled, and she needed a way to get to work. I asked if she was okay. "I didn't go to the hospital," she shrugged it off. "I've fine." Then came the real reason for her call. "Can I borrow your car?" I almost laughed. After everything she had put me through, this was what she thought she could ask of me? "No," I said, my voice firm. "That's not happening." Her tone shifted, sharp and cold. "Well, can you drive me to work then?" "No," I repeated, even firmer this time. "I have physical therapy appointments, and I can't help you." She paused, clearly annoyed. "That's not my problem." That's when I snapped. "You're right," I said, my voice steady and clear. "You're not my problem anymore." She hung up without another word. For a moment, I sat there staring at my phone, the silence in my house louder than ever. But something was different this time. For the first time, I felt free. Like I had finally realized I didn't owe her anything. Not my time, not my energy, not my car. She had made her choices, and now she would have to live with them. From that day forward, I stopped caring about her. Not in a bitter or angry way, but in the way you stop caring about something that's already over. I stopped checking her social media. I stopped asking friends about her. I stopped holding on to the hope that she might change. Instead, I started focusing on myself. The months passed, and little by little, I began rebuilding my life. My back still hurt, but I pushed myself to be more active. I started walking outside for short stretches, fixing up the little things around the house that had been neglected. It wasn't much, but it was a start. The house no longer felt like a ghost of the past. Slowly, it began to feel like my space, my fresh start. By January 2024, I noticed a shift. The doctor had performed a procedure to numb the nerves in my lower back, helping me manage the pain. For the first time in over a year, I wasn't wincing with every step. I wasn't completely healed, but there was hope. Maybe, just maybe, I could get back to something resembling normal, or at least a version of it. It's strange, really. You spend years building a life with someone, and then, in what feels like the blink of an eye, it's all gone. But sometimes losing everything forces you to rebuild yourself piece by piece. I didn't think I'd ever find peace after everything that happened, but here I am, still standing. Maybe I'm not where I thought I'd be. Maybe I'm still figuring out who I am without her. But for the first time in a long time, I'm looking forward instead of back. I'm learning to let go, not just of her, but of the anger, the regret, and the blame I carried for so long. It's not easy. Some days are better than others. But I'm still here. I'm still trying. And that's enough.